And we're back for the final segment of the Heart of Rural America podcast, reporting live from Washington, D.C. It's our final day in the big city. We're ready to get back home to the ranches in South Dakota. Our final guest for this episode is Senator Mark Lapka from the beautiful town of Leola, South Dakota. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me back. It's been a while.
Are we tired?
Not too bad. Not a lot of sleep, a lot of walking, a lot of work, long days, but it's sure been worth it.
Now, you come from a farm and ranch in Leola, South Dakota. Population what?
430.
And you are a first-term senator in your first year of your term of service. This was your first time to Washington, D.C.
Yep, very first time to Washington, D.C. Similar as to 4 years ago was my very first time. The Capitol and Pier, someplace that I never anticipated on going, never thought it would come to this point. But here we are. We've come a long ways. It's been a very big issue. We've gained a lot of traction, got a lot done, and only to come to find out that it became endangered what we all accomplished in the state of South Dakota via the passage of HB 1052 became in jeopardy with the federal government. But it's because of all that work that the South Dakotans carried out and accomplished that this has now become a national issue. And it's really given South Dakota a placeholder status to accomplish some good, and we have.
Absolutely. Well, before we dive into that, I just want to say, as a first-term senator, not only have you got off the bench to serve because of this issue, right? I mean, the farm was being threatened along with so many of your friends and family and people you cared about across the state of South Dakota. But you've gotten yourself pretty active in the Senate. Can you tell a little bit about what committees and groups and things you're on in the Senate? Like, what aren't you on at this point? But
well, when I first entered into this arena, I anticipated it being about a 3-month-a-year job, during session, and then you could go back the remainder of the 9 months and live out a normal life until you had to go back to session. I was fortunately placed on the Appropriations Committee. That's one of the workhorse committees of our legislature. It meets every day for 4 hours and sometimes for another couple in the afternoon, and it also carries on through the remainder of the interim over the summer, fall, winter. And so we'll be meeting multiple times with that. I was also placed on the Government Operations and Audit Committee, which meets several times over the interim as well. Governor Larry Roden appointed me to the Prison Task Force in the state of South Dakota, where we're in the process of determining a new location and a better facility for a prison in the state. I'm also on an Ag Land Advisory Task Force as well, too, as, unfortunately, one of the things that I've discovered, our legislature is underrepresented when it comes to folks in agriculture. That's something that has changed over time. The makeup used to be a lot more ag oriented. We don't have that anymore. That's something that I would like to see improve, because ag sure deserves an independent voice.
Hear that, everybody? Senator Lapka says if you're a farmer and rancher, it's time to run for office. That we need your voice in Pierre and across the nation in any capacity that you can serve. Now, there's a lot of questions I have about the different committees you're on, but being on appropriations has kind of allowed you to see kind of how the sausage gets made, so to speak, than the dollars and cents. So going into this trip to Washington, D.C., this Budget Reconciliation Act, I guess as an appropriator, how did you look at this whole bill in terms of fiscal responsibility and just the massive amounts of spending that we're doing coming from Congress?
Well, it's a particularly interesting situation with the Budget Reconciliation Act, because President Trump had instilled the DOGE department to hope create some efficiencies and streamlining of government spending and rein some of that back in. And a lot of that was accomplished effectively. However, with the advent of the Budget Reconciliation Act, all of a sudden it appeared that there was going to be even more spending. A lot of it was cleaned up in the Budget Reconciliation Act as well. A lot of the Green New Deal credits were removed as far as wind, solar, electric vehicles. And unfortunately, it's the 45Q that seems to be the sticking point, the one that I would particularly like to see go. But it also increases the debt limit. And, currently we're at a $37 trillion deficit in the United States of America. And one starts to wonder, when is the well going to run dry? How far can we go before we would actually fall off a fiscal cliff? While there's some similarities to our state appropriations process, this is on a much, much, much grander scale. And the dollar figures are so astronomical that, it was a 1,600-page bill by the time it was said and done. Our state budget of the G bill, that was only about 30. So, the numbers are a lot bigger. Obviously, it's on a lot bigger level. There's some similarities, there's some differences, but at the end of the day, I would like to see the spending come down in both arenas.
Yeah, I don't know if you have any comments on this, but I'll comment on it. It's been wild. We're not going to forget this trip, because as the Trump Elon Musk fight has been playing out online, on the news, in interviews, and in tweets on X. We've been here living it, like it's hearing people chatter about it in the Capitol, in the restaurants we're at. It seems like everybody's watching kind of that dialogue play out. Any comments on that, or just it's been quite something?
You know, just walking around the Capitol, walking around the Senate and representatives offices, everybody's talking about it. It appears to be, quite the big deal. Where it's all going to shake out remains to be seen. There's sure a lot of chatter. You're getting an Uber, you're getting a taxi. That's the first thing that they want to talk about. So everybody's pretty well dialed in out here.
Yep. And really, I mean, Elon's message is he's helped to make all these tax cuts. And yet this bill, this big, beautiful bill, is pretty sizable. It's huge. And so I think that lends itself to what we were focusing on is this 45Q, is that we are spending billions, if not trillions of dollars to fund the Green New Deal, to bury plant food, to really add to our national debt for what? For literally what? And so I think it's a pretty reasonable ask to say we don't think that the tax-paying citizens should have to pay write the check for projects of this ilk. I guess that's not even a question. That's just me grandstanding, Senator. But
well, I do have a response to
okay.
that because, and it does pertain to fiscal responsibility. Currently, the 45Q pays out about $30 to $40 billion or annually. With all the proposed projects across the country going on with carbon sequestration, it's going to rise into the high hundreds of billions of dollars per year within the next dozen or so years. And there's also a proposal out there by Senator Murkowski out of Alaska that would expand that tax credit from $85 a ton currently to $250 a ton. Mm-hmm. So one is able to surmise that now all of a sudden we're talking multiples of trillions. And that's with the proposed projects, which could take us into the, tens of thousands of miles of carbon pipelines and sequestration sites across the country. But if you get out into 2050, where they're speculating that there could be upwards of 100 or more thousand miles of carbon pipelines, you start plugging those figures into that. And all of a sudden, you're getting into multiples upon multiples of what our entire federal budget is for each year. And so it's like, there again, how are we possibly going to afford this? What are we accomplishing by doing it? It just seems a little crazy.
And all we're really advocating for is, I don't know, common sense and conservatism, limited government, fiscal responsibility. Not that wild of an ask, if you ask me. Now, Senator, tell me what's next, because kind of the general consensus from our Senate meetings, especially with Senate Majority Leader Thune, was that there really was not much of an appetite to address the 45Q, but he was very confident that federal preemption for eminent domain use and CO2 pipelines would not come back. However, we're not out of the woodworks yet. Could you talk procedurally what happens? So it's going to have a vote on the Senate side, but can you talk about if it does get kicked back to the House? What happens there? What's the process?
Well, the process is similar to the process that we have in our state legislature in South Dakota. The bill originated in the House of Representatives. They went through it and put it through the meat grinder and came out with a finished product that passed on a very thin margin. The bill then moved over to the Senate. The Senate's going to take approximately the next 2 weeks to work their way through it, and they're going to make changes on it. The bill then has to go back to the House. There's a couple options. The most likely option is that they're going to want to take it to the floor and get it passed right away and get it signed. That's probably the most likely direction. If there's not concurrence amongst the House of Representatives, it then would have to go to a conference committee between the two chambers, the Senate and the House, and they would have to work out their differences, and then each chamber would have to vote on it prior to it being signed.
And so with all that in mind, I guess what would the call to action be for all the people at home? And I'm not just talking South Dakota, really across the nation. What is the call to action here if you're specifically worried about private property rights and carbon sequestration pipelines?
The call to action here is everything that is in the Budget Reconciliation Act bad? No. There's a lot of good in there that will do a lot of good for our country and our nation and our states. Mm-hmm. But when it comes to protecting property rights, the whole crux of the matter is that if the 45Q was not exist, and they weren't chasing that almighty dollar, we wouldn't be dealing with a lot of the violations of these property rights. So when it comes to carbon sequestration and protecting property rights, the call to action is to be specific. Contact your congressman and let them know specifically that you would like to see the 45Q tax credits removed.
Absolutely. And we appreciate everyone back home getting to work. Your calls and emails are being noticed out here in DC. Want to switch gears here as we have just a few minutes left of the show, but another hot topic of conversation out in Washington, D.C. this week has been the Angus Foundation and their partnership with Jeff Bezos. You and I both raise Angus cattle. This has been something we're watching closely. Of course, my good friend Chris Earl has been promoting this and has been a whistleblower on it. There's a petition out there to ask the Angus Foundation to return that $4.53 million gift from the Jeff Bezos and methane hub. I think it's at 3,000 plus signatures at this point. But as an Angus cattle rancher's perspective, I guess what's your view on this? You're a commercial operator, cow calf guy. By the way, he's calving right now and he's out in D.C. instead of watching for new calves. What's your perspective on this partnership?
Well, it's just completely what was going to happen in the beginning once you went down the avenue of caving to this climate mitigating circumstances in exchange for money. I remember it was March 25th of 2022 when the PUC held their initial round of public hearings in Aberdeen, South Dakota. And when I got up to speak, I spoke to the fact of how bending the knee to carbon dioxide was only going to open up the door to the next one on the table, and that was methane emissions. They say that the number one emitter of methane emissions is the oil and gas industry. Followed closely by that is number two is the livestock industry. Well, that's something that my family's made its living, since the beginning of our farm, since we homesteaded here, 150 years ago. And it just seems like if we're going to do this with carbon, and now we come after it with methane, it's going to put at jeopardy and peril the ability for family farms and ranches to survive, because they're going to want to put an index score on it, similar to what they did with the ethanol plants, except this will be pertaining to methane. And if you're not able to harness that, you're going to end up getting paid less. And ultimately, if you're going to not abide by it, you're not going to be able to sell your product. And with what's going on with the American Angus Association, that's troubling to me in the manner of, nobody can create something better than God. And he created those animals to digest that and run through their rumen. Do they release methane? Sure. But it's a natural process that I believe is not very harmful to the environment. And to try to, in fact, play God and change their physiology in a manner that causes them to do that less, how is that going to affect our product? The American cattleman's got so much to be proud of that we do put the best product on the plate in the entire world. And if we're going to mess around with that, that might not be the case anymore. We'll lose our competitive advantage. And well, quite frankly, cattle people are some of the proudest people that I've known, that I've, met throughout all this process. And that's very much a way of life that I want to see remain intact.
Well, and a tiger doesn't change its stripes, right? So Bezos has made it abundantly clear where he stands in animal agriculture and giving up that data, that DNA, the genetics of these Angus cattle, and giving it to someone who, no matter what you do, you will never be green enough for these people that don't want you to be in business at all. It's like my fight with animal rights activists. You think you can get to the table, and because you're reasonable and you come at it that maybe you would be willing to compromise. Well, they might take an inch now, but they really want a mile. And it's the same with these climate change extremists. We don't need to speak their language. The market, outside of government subsidies that are incentivizing this nonsense, the market, the consumer, is not asking for this at all. And so to speak their language, to even acknowledge the premise that cattle are a problem as it relates to the climate, it's going down a pathway of our own demise. And so at some point, the American cattle rancher has to just stake his flag in the ground and say, this is who we are. We are proud of it. We're a success story. We're not going anywhere. The entire world covets the beef that we raise here. And we're going to keep doing what we're doing because we know we have the land. We know we have the livestock. We have all the leverage in the world as long as we don't give it up to somebody else. I guess I'd encourage you all to go check out that petition. I will provide that in the link below or in the comments of the show notes. But I guess, Senator Lapke, parting words. We've got to head to the airport. Carla, you and I are headed, or the last stragglers here in DC, ready to get back home. I guess any final words to close out the show?
Well, I think the final words that I would say, when this process all started, I met so many people that we were all just kind of wandering around aimlessly. We were entering into something that we had never tried to take on before, and all kind of shared the sentiment of, I can't do anything about it. But I just want to appreciate the perseverance of the good folks back home in South Dakota, because so many stuck with it. Hardly anybody ever fell off, and it only continued to gain steam and momentum. And it was that coming together of people that was able to accomplish big things that had implications far beyond the borders of the state of South Dakota. This has affected our country. We've met with representatives and senators that specifically stated South Dakota was the impetus in all of this. And so the bottom line is, if you have something that you feel strongly and passionate about, you can make a difference.
Mhm.
You just have to stick with it.
Absolutely. And I guess just final thought as we get ready for this landowner victory party. You and Ed Fishbach, almost 4.5 years ago now, you guys were the beginning of this. This thing is huge now, and it grows bigger by the day as more and more people learn about the attacks on their life and liberty and their private property rights and their American dream at the hand of, corporatists that want to take what's not theirs. Guess what does this celebration mean to you after all these years, all this fighting, all this bringing together people who come from very different ways of life, by the way, very different, a lot of differences and personalities in this huge group of the landowners. What does this mean to you to come together and just take a moment to celebrate in the middle of the fight?
It's kind of like a coming home party.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what, because I've gotten so busy as of late, I'm gone from home an awful lot more than I'd like to be. I don't get to talk to a lot of the folks that I've met along this process, and that's probably been the very best thing about all this. I've met so many good people that I never thought I would.
Mhm.
I know so many of them are going to be there, and for once, get together that we're not talking about a meeting where our head's on the chopping block, and we have to be worried that this is going to have a lot lighter feel and a more happy feel to it. And that's something that I'm really looking forward to.
I'm pretty excited too. There's going to be dancing. There's going to be, it's just going to be a great celebration, just to pause to appreciate the people who really have become family. I mean, your family. We have stood together, locked arms together, and fought the good fight, and we are leading the way. I truly believe that, as other states are starting to pay attention to what we've done in South Dakota, and as they face their own fights, what they can do to emulate what we've done here and find success as well in their own challenges. So with that, thank you so much for being on the show. I'm Amanda Radke for the Heart of Rural America podcast. If you enjoyed this content, be sure to subscribe, leave a comment, and a review, and stay tuned till next Wednesday when a new episode drops. Take care.